the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to our continuation of Series 19. This one looking at the players of the 2023 Asian Cup, due to be played in January 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Iran. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin and this is Series 19 on the players of the 2023 Asian Cup to be played in 2024. And this episode covers Iran's players. We are doing this mediacast in two parts. Part one is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. We think we went into too much detail in previous player mediacasts we've done, so we're aiming for a lighter, kind of more narrative-friendly, listener-friendly kind of version this time. Part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad is selected. We think that will be in late December or perhaps early January. At that time, we'll go back over the list that we create today and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover some other things, but I'll talk about that more at the end of the MediaCast Part 1 here. We have also made a separate video on what we'll be covering over the next 9 months, so YouTube watchers can see the link to that on the screen, and it can also be found in the show notes for both watchers and listeners. In short, we're focused on the Asian and African Cups, with both of these taking place in early 2024. And we've also started coverage on 2026 World Cup qualifying. This is our second time covering Iran, and the first time I was also wearing a Mexico shirt because I don't have an Iran shirt, and my collection is still quite poor, but it is growing, and at least I'm trying to get the colors right. But I hope I'm not offending our Iranian fans by wearing the wrong country's jersey. Okay, so in this episode, there are 3 sections. Section 1, we will give some information, general information on the team and discuss a little bit. Section 2 is the main part where we look at the candidates in each position, just focusing on the main candidates here. So we'll maybe mention the names of the kind of the outside possibilities, but won't go into detail on them. And in section 3, we'll give any closing thoughts and we will preview what's to come in part 2 in a bit more detail. Okay, let's move on to section 1 then, general information about the squad. So we'll start with a couple of observations here. And I guess the main one is there's a new manager. So it's actually been quite a story since the even since before the World Cup. So Carlos Queiroz was their manager before the World Cup, and in fact was their manager for the 2019 Asian Cup. So it looks on the surface like he's been their consistent manager, but in fact he was replaced after the 2019 Asian Cup with Mark Wilmots, and also with Dragan Skocic. And things didn't work out there. So just before the World Cup, about 3 months before the World Cup, they called Carlos Queiroz back in, and he managed them through the World Cup in what we'll see here was kind of a fairly unsettled squad. Carlos Queiroz was dismissed after the World Cup, and in came the new manager, Amir Galanoye, and he also had managed Iran before in the past. We'll take a closer look at that when we cover his bio. But as opposed to Carlos Queiroz, he has kind of kept things the same. Queiroz made quite a few changes in the few months before the World Cup, but it seems like Galanoye has specifically tried to keep things settled and more the same. So the note here is that they're a more settled team. When we did our podcast for Iran before the World Cup, it was really chaotic trying to figure out who was going to be on the squad or who the starters were going to be. And to make matters worse, a lot of the starters changed after game one, where they lost heavily to England. So I think Galanoye's goal was to kind of try to keep things settled. So even after he arrived, we see that there's not a notable difference in the lineups or in the players he's selecting. Okay, and yeah, that kind of plays into our third point. There are a few changes to the squad despite that manager change. So quite a few players changed leading up to the World Cup, but not so many changes since then. Okay, well, we look at retirement, and as I said, there are a few changes to the squad. There are really none of note. In fact, I wouldn't even say that. I would just say none. Not only since the World Cup in December 2022, but since the Asian Cup in 2019. And in fact, unlike a lot of teams in this 2023 Asian Cup, where we see big changes since the last tournament 4 years ago, Iran looks remarkably similar to the 2019 Asian Cup squad. However, with that comes the fact that many of the players are in their 30s. They haven't brought a lot of youth in, and we can expect a big overhaul over the next few years. But I suppose that's a matter for future podcasts. And as far as this one goes, they look a very steady squad. Let's take a look at the clubs that the players play for. And we begin with the main domestic clubs, where about 2/3 of the players play in Iran. And they have some very good clubs who do well in the Asian Champions League. The three biggest ones where most players are coming from are Istiklal, Persepolis, and Sepahan. Pretty dominant clubs there in Iran. In terms of players playing outside of the country, as I mentioned, about 1/3 of the players do. And only a few are in nearby countries in the Middle East. So a couple of players in the UAE and one or two, I think it's just one in Qatar. And then a couple of players in Russia and in Turkey. But they do have some big names, players playing with pretty big name clubs. Most notably Porto in Portugal, Roma in Italy, Brentford in England, and then two players with AEK Athens in Greece. All right, so a very experienced squad here. I actually will say what I think right now, which is I think they have a good chance of winning this cup with a very mature squad and experienced players. Okay, well, when we look at the players, we're going to look at their participation over the last 2 years, and that is our main guide to whether we think they will make the squad or not, or their likelihood of making the squad. And so we're going to look at those games over the last 2 years just briefly here. We're not really focused on the scores so much, but we will focus on the lineups and the squad that was brought to these games. So we begin in 2022, and they start with 4 World Cup qualifiers. And that was in January to March of 2022. And it was Iraq, UAE, South Korea, and Lebanon. Next, they had a couple of friendlies in June of that year, June 2022. Actually, not a couple, just one, and it was against Algeria. And they had games in September. So now we have, I'll just put a note here, the new manager coming in before these games in September. Prior to that, it was manager Dragan Skocic. who was manager from 2020 to 2022. So before those two September friendlies, Carlos Queiroz came in, and they had games against Uruguay and Senegal in the lead up to the World Cup. And they also had one game in November, oddly, against Nicaragua. And then, of course, the following games were the World Cup finals themselves. That was in December 2022, and they didn't pass the group stage, so only had 3 games there, and that was against England, Wales, and USA. After the World Cup, manager Carlos Queiroz was let go, and the first games they had after that were friendlies in March, 2 games in March 2023 against Russia and Kenya, and that was under the new manager, Amir Galanoye. In June, they had a tournament. Their local group had its first cup, and so in their local group, the Central Asian Football Association, or CAFA, they had 3 games there in June, and it's a small cup. And they were against Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, and then in the final, Uzbekistan. And finally, since then, they have had 2 friendly games in September against Bulgaria and Angola, and 2 friendly games in October against Jordan and Qatar. So we'll just take a look at the formations in those games. So it's actually fairly consistent there. In 2022, under manager Skokic, it was quite consistently a 4-1-4-1. I'll just put this on the screen. A 4-1 formation, a 4-1-4-1 formation, or a 4-3-3 formation. So 4 at the back, and we're going to see it kind of continues anywhere from 1 to 3 forwards. And then, of course, Carlos Queiroz came in September, shortly before the Cup. And at first, at least in terms of formations, he didn't make any changes. He played his 2 September friendlies in those 2 formations we talked about, 4-1-4-1 and a 4-3-3. And in November against Nicaragua, also a 4-3-3. So it makes me scratch my head a little bit that when he got to the World Cup, he suddenly started making big changes to the formation. So against England, it was a 5-4-1. And I got to say, one thing I would not do is suddenly change to a completely new formation at the start of the World Cup. But there he did it, a 5-4-1 against England, and I'm not sure if that was part of the reason they lost so heavily. They lost 6-2 to England. In the second game, he made a lot of changes to the squad and went back to the 4-3-3 formation, which would have been more familiar to the players. And then against USA, again, a brand new formation, a 4-4-1-1. So to me, I'm a little critical of the sudden and big changes in formation brought to the World Cup. And perhaps the Iran FA was too, because they got rid of him. Iran was really hoping and realistically expecting, I should say realistically hoping to pass from that group stage. It's definitely within their means to do so, and so it was a disappointing result. So in comes new manager Galanoye, and although he didn't experiment with the squad that much, he certainly did at first with formations. So a couple of wacky formations here, a 4-4-1-1 against Russia. That was actually what they had used against USA in the final game of the World Cup, and a 4-2-4 formation. I'll let you sit and absorb that in your mental image, against Kenya, 4-2-4. So no forwards really in that formation. Okay, and then we get to the CAFA Cup, and again a new formation, but it was the same in all 3 games, a 4-2-2-2. So that's a variation on a 4-4-2, just with 2 lines of midfielders. And we're going to see that seems to be their default formation going forward, a 4-4-2. But it was a 4-2-2-2 in the 3 games of the Cup. The first friendly against Bulgaria was a bit of an odd 4-3-1-2 formation, but against Angola it was that 4-4-2 formation. And then in October, the 4-4-2 formation again, and the 4-3-3 formation, which players would have been familiar with under the previous 2 managers. So we can kind of summarize the recent formations as a 4-4-2, or that could be a 4-2-2-2. Or else a 4-3-3, I'm tempted to say, even though the new manager has used it just once, it seems to be a familiar formation for the squad. So if we look at the pattern there, it's always 4 at the back, except for that 1 game against England. And it's usually 2 or 3 up front, although sometimes just the single forward. Okay, let's move on to their upcoming games. And they have World Cup qualifiers starting in 2026. This is actually round 2 of the World Cup qualifiers. Round 1 was a preliminary round. And we actually did a series of podcasts for those kind of weaker teams in the region. And those took place in October. So the winners of that preliminary round moved on to this, the kind of the group stage of World Cup. And in fact, one of the winners is the first team that they play. Hong Kong won their preliminary round quite easily over Bhutan. And Iran plays them at home in their first game. So a pretty nice fixture to start with. And then the second one is away in Uzbekistan. And interestingly, too, they just played away in Uzbekistan in the CAF Nations Cup, which was hosted by Uzbekistan. And they won that game. So they won the first tournament of that CAF region. Won that game 1-0, so just a single goal there. So a bit of a tougher game away in Uzbekistan. That is November 15th, playing Hong Kong at home, and November 20th, playing Uzbekistan at home. So we would probably expect to see their best lineup here, especially against Uzbekistan, and maybe a glimpse or a bit more information on who we would see in the starting lineup in the Asian Cup. All right, let's move on to section 2, and we begin with the players of Iran here. So what we're doing here is a look at the candidates and their likelihood of making it, ranging from definite, likely, and possible, and then possible but unlikely and seems to be off the squad. We won't be adding a lot of names to those, just ones who could be on the squad there. Okay, and we've talked a bit about the managers, so this is kind of a review, but Carlos Queiroz, the outgoing manager, has actually moved on to become the manager of Qatar now, and he has had a tournament since the World Cup, actually, guiding Qatar through the 2023 Gold Cup. So Qatar joined the North and Central American countries for the Gold Cup, and Caribbean countries. That's the word I was looking for. So he's gone, and we won't give a bio on Carlos Queiroz here because he's the outgoing manager. So I'll just kind of change his color to red there, and in comes Amir Galanoye. So we will do a bit of a bio on him because he's the manager since February or March of 2023. Okay, Amir Galanoye was a player. He played professionally in Iran from 1981 to 1997 and earned 20 international caps, but he was never selected for a tournament. However, he has been through a tournament as a manager. He was the manager of Iran from 2006 to 2007 and guided them through the guided them through the 2007 Asian Cup. Otherwise, he's actually been with some of the biggest clubs in Iran. Tractor, which used to be known as Tractor Sazi, one of my favorite club names, I must say. And he's coached some of the big teams we mentioned too, Esteghlal and Sepahan there. But as far as international management goes, it's just been those two stints as Iran manager. So there we go. Let's move on to goalkeepers, and we'll begin by naming the candidates here. So I'll just point out, as I have in other podcasts, that if their name is in black letters, as it is with Ali Reza Berenvand here, that means they have been through a tournament before. And if their name is in grey, that means they have not been through a tournament. Okay, so the definite candidate, Ali Reza Berenvand, is first on the list, and we have another definite in Payam Niyazmand. And then we have several possible candidates. The first is Hussein Husseini, and the second one is Hossein Pourhamidi. Then there's Mohammed Reza Akbari. And finally, we will put him on the list, the possible but unlikely candidate, Amir Abedzadeh. And I'll let you know soon why we're adding him to the list. So let's go back and take a look at these candidates. Ali Reza Berenvand has actually only started 12 of the 21 games over the past 2 years. He was on the bench for 5 games and then out with 2 separate injuries for 2 and not selected for 2 matches. So he's almost certainly the starting keeper, but other keepers kind of have been getting a run out during the last 2 years. So he was the starting keeper in the 2018 World Cup and all the tournaments since, the 2019 Asian Cup and the 2022 World Cup, although he did get injured 20 minutes into that first game against England and was replaced for the second game. We'll talk about who replaced him. He plays for Persepolis in Iran, but has played abroad. He was with Royal Antwerp in Belgium and Boavista in Portugal, and then he returned back to Persepolis in 2022. He was also on the squad for the 2015 Asian Cup, which was the backup keeper there. So Ali Reza Berenvand is the starting keeper, although he has been subbed out in the first 20 minutes 3 times, including that one against England. So that's kind of an interesting stat about him. Also a definite candidate, but the backup keeper is Payam Niyazmand. So he seems to have taken over the second keeper spot, and we'll talk about that when we summarize the position. He was on the bench for the 2019 Asian Cup and the 2022 World Cup, but he was probably the 3rd string keeper in both of those. Over the past 2 years, he started 4 of their 21 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 12. That's why we consider him a definite candidate. The only 3 matches he missed were at the beginning of this 2-year period. So Payam Niyazmand, a definite candidate to reach the cup, though we're not claiming he's going to be the starter. In fact, he probably won't be. Okay, the first of our possible candidate is Hossein Hosseini. He's been with the team since 2018 and has 10 caps. And as far as tournaments go, he was on the preliminary rosters for the 2018 World Cup and 2019 Asian Cup, but didn't make the squad. But he did for the 2022 World Cup. And in fact, he was the backup keeper. So he was the one who replaced Berenvand when he got injured in game 1. He was off the team for 5 games prior to the October games here, but he did return to the bench for the last 2 games. So again, in the summary of this section, we'll kind of see that he's dropped off out of the second string keeper position. Okay, look, sorry, Hossein Pourhamidi is the next possible candidate, and he just has one cap for the national team since 2023. He got his first appearance on the bench and didn't start any of the 9 games since his first appearance, but he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 5. However, he was not selected for 3 matches, including the last 2. So it seemed like he was kind of replacing Hossein Husseini there. And we're not sure which one is looking the more likely here. So he looked promising from his first one in March 2023, but then not so much for the last few games. Okay, and the third possible candidate is Mohamed Reza Akbari. So he has 1 cap for the national team since 2016, poor fellow. And he started none of their games over the past 2 years, but he was on the bench for 4 of them and not selected for 17 others. However, he was called up as recently as the September matches, so perhaps it's being considered, and because of that, we put him at the possible level, though he seems a bit less likely than Hosseini or Pourhamidi. And we are going to mention the possible but unlikely player, Amir Abedzadeh, and he started 4 of their 21 games early in this 2-year period leading up to now. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 6, but not selected for 10, including the last 9 matches, which is why we have him as possible, but unlikely. But we're going to see he actually played a much bigger role earlier in 2022. And he does play for Maritimo in Portugal, which is a reasonably big squad, and actually has been playing there in Spain or Portugal since 2016. And in other places, kind of all over the world, in USA, but with the Tottenham Youth Club in England. Okay, so let's do a summary of this section. And it is Ali Reza Berenvand about 75% of the time, or of recent games, I would say, from the World Cup onwards, playing as the starter. Hosseini replaced him, as we saw, when he got injured in the World Cup, but recently it is Niazmand replacing him now, taking over the second string keeper spot. Abedzadeh, our possible but unlikely candidate, had been the backup at the start of 2022, but under Carlos Queiroz, Hosseini became the backup keeper, and as I said, more recently, Niazmand, the backup. So we are not sure which of the possible candidates. They'll bring 3 to the Cup. Actually, I think they brought 4 to the World Cup. So they may bring 2 of these players, but we're not sure which ones. Hossein Husseini, Hossein Pourhamidi, and a bit less likely Mohamed Reza Akbari. But Amir Abedzadeh seems to be off the squad now. Okay, let's move on to central defenders. And we'll begin just by naming the candidates. So Hossein Kanani is a definite candidate, and Shoja Khalilzadeh is a likely candidate, Shoja Khalilzadeh, and also likely Omid Nuraf Khan. And well, we have a likely candidate in Morteza Poralaganji, but a bit more information on him to come. And then we have a few possible candidates: Majid Hosseini, Araf Agassi, and Amin Hasbavi, and Mohamed Daneshkar. 4 possible candidates there. And we actually have 3 candidates who I'll name but they're possible but unlikely. So I'm just going to name them here, and then if they appear on the final squad, we'll come back and introduce them a bit more. Armin Sorabian is possible but unlikely. Mohammed Hossein Moradmand, and Milad Zakipur, three players who are possible but unlikely. We even have two who seem to be off the squad, but we won't even name them. Let's go back and take a closer look then at these more main candidates, beginning with Hossein Kanani. So he's been with the team since 2015 and has 42 caps and 4 goals. And he was not part of the 2018 Asian Cup, but on the bench for the 2019 Asian Cup, and also a bench player in the 2022 World Cup. But he seems to have since become a starter. He started 12 of their 21 games over the past 2 years. He was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 4. So just 3 matches that he was not selected for. And so still not secured his position as a starter. In fact, he wasn't selected for the 2 September games, but he does definitely seem to be always called up, whether as a starter or as a substitute. So starting about half the games, a little more than half. Okay, next we have Shoja Khalizadeh, and he's been with the team since 2009, so he's quite old at 34 years old. Here he has 30 caps and 2 goals, and he was actually off the team for a period of 7.5 years prior to the World Cup there, but he did make the World Cup squad. He was a substitute on the bench. He didn't get onto the field. Over the past 2 years, though, he has started 8 matches, including the last 4 of the 21 games from, over the past 2 years, subbing in for 1 and on the bench for 4, and then injured for 2 and not selected for 6. So we consider Shoja Khalizadeh a likely candidate, and he's been in and out a bit over the past 2 years, but he did start the last 4 games, and in fact sometimes even starts as a right back rather than as a central defender, which is his main designation. The other likely candidate is Omid Nurafkan. So Omid Nurafkan has been on the team since 2018 with 19 caps. However, he has not made a tournament yet. Selected for a couple of preliminary squads in there, but not making a tournament. Over the past 2 years, though, he's gotten a bit more involvement, and that is 9 of their 21 games that he started over the past 2 years, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. However, he was injured for the last 4 matches, and we don't have much information on what kind of an injury that is, whether it looks long-term or short-term. So we have to wait till part 2 of the of this mediacast to investigate that. He was also not selected for 5 matches. So again, Omid Nurafkan on and off as a starting player, and I do have a note actually that he's due back from injury in December of this year. So it looks like it's not going to be a problem. However, it is going to be a problem for our next candidate, Morteza Poralganji. So he caused us a lot of confusion as to whether he would make it to the World Cup, because he was injured for a long period before and off the squad. So it didn't look like he was it looked like he was off the squad. I kind of think that for a while we didn't know that it was an injury, and we thought he was just off the squad. And nevertheless, he was selected for the World Cup squad and a starter, as he had been for the 2015 and 19 Asian Cups and the World Cup in 2018. So a player that struggles with injury kind of in between tournaments, because he always seems to make it there. However, it looks like he won't make his way through this time. So he had returned after a 15-month absence. Again, that seems to have been due to injury. Yes, a torn knee ligament prior to the World Cup, but he returned in September 2022 and was named to the World Cup. However, in October, just recently, he suffered a cruciate ligament injury and the note on it says that he is out until May 2024. So it looks like Morteza Pouralganji is not going to be a candidate here. And in fact, I'm going to put him in the injured section because it does seem to be a long-term injury. And we'll deal with the shorter-term injuries in the next in part 2 of this podcast in late December or early January. Okay, let's look at our possible candidates, and keeping in mind that they'll probably bring, usually teams bring around 5 or even 6 central defenders. So some of these guys do have a decent chance, especially with Pouralganji out. One of those will have to replace him. It could be Majid Hosseini, who has been on the team since 2018 with 25 caps. And he made all of the 3 recent tournaments, the 2018 and 2022 World Cups and the 2019 Asian Cup. In fact, in 2022, he started all 3 games, finally becoming a starter in the tournament. So over the past 2 years, he started 10 of their 21 games. And he subbed in for 1, was on the bench for 1. But he was out with 3 separate injuries, smaller injuries, for 6 games and not selected for 3 others. And one of those injuries is a toe injury, which I think he recovered from because that was in September. He just wasn't selected in October. So we don't know if that's due to injury or whether he was just not selected. Actually, the source says he just wasn't selected. But sometimes after an injury, players are not selected. So Majid Hosseini plays for Kayserispor in Turkey, by the way, and was with Trabzonspor in Turkey before that from 2018. So we consider him a possible candidate, but we'll have to see if injury plays a role in his selection. Next, we have our second possible candidate, Araf Agassi. So he's been on the team, well, really since 2021. He got his first cap in 2022, but got his first appearance on the bench in March of 2021. But he only has 1 cap since that time, and otherwise was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 4 over the past 2 years. And not selected for 16 matches. So really, he's close to being a possible but unlikely candidate. Pouralganji's injury, though, may improve his chances or the chances of one of the 2 other players here. The next one is Amin Hasbavi, and he is brand new to the squad in October, got his first appearance there on the bench in October. That was just a few weeks ago because we're doing this at the end of October. And he didn't start any of those 2 games, but he was on the bench for both. Or also new in September, our fourth possible candidate, Mohamed Daneshkar. And he actually did get a cap in September 2023 and started one of their remaining 4 games there. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2 others. So actually, it's Mohamed Daneshkar among the 3 of them who seems the most possible. Okay, and then as we said, we have 3 candidates. So Armin, 3 candidates at the possible but unlikely level. So Armin Sorabian was not selected for the last 7. Mohamed Hossein Moradmand was new in September, but not selected for the October games. And then Milad Zakipor just got a quick look in and out in March 2023, kind of brought into the team then, but not appearing since. So none of those seem really viable options. Okay, so let's finish central defenders with a little narrative on the position. So really, it's been a mix of candidates. We can't really say anyone who looks like a definite starter here, although several of these players, especially Kanani, Khalilzadeh, Nuraf Khan, and Puralaganji, have all been kind of sharing starts. And in fact, right defender Haji Safi, who's all over the field, also coming in as a central defender once. So in the World Cup, it was Puralaganji and Hosseini. Majid Hosseini, who is now just a possible candidate as the starters, and a defensive midfielder, Chesney, came in when they used a three-man central defence against England. But neither of them are looking like likely candidates for this cup. So a bit of a mix here. Not really sure who's going to start. November will be interesting to see, because we could be seeing who the manager has in mind with his selections there. Let's move on to left backs, and we begin with a definite candidate, Ehsan Haji Safi. I believe he is the captain. He was in the World Cup in 2022 anyway. We have a possible candidate, Milad Mohammadi. And we have a possible but unlikely candidate in Abulfazi Jalali, but I will put his name on the list since there is a chance of him coming back. So Ehsan Haji Safi is a very interesting player. He plays for AEK Athens in Greece and has played for Olympiacos in Greece as well as a team in Germany. And he's been around for a long time, since 2008, and has 133 caps and 7 goals, and is 33 years old. And ever since the Asian Cup in 2011, he has been a starter on their squads, including the 2022 World Cup, where he was captain, as I mentioned. Over the past 2 years, he started 14 of their 21 games, and he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1. So only 3 matches that he wasn't selected for out of 21. Although he was a sub in 3 of the last 6 games. I'm not really sure if that is significant, but he is getting older. And nevertheless, a definite candidate for this tournament. And we're going to see that he plays in various positions, coded as primarily as a left back. But we saw him in central defence, and we're going to see him further upfield soon too. So because he does play out of position quite a bit, that gives Milad Mohammadi, our possible candidate, a bit more time on the field. Milad Mohammadi has been with the team since 2015 and has 52 caps and 1 goal. And he also plays for AEK Athens in Greece, together with Haji Safi. And he has been with teams in Belgium and Russia as well. His first tournament was the 2018 World Cup, and he was also on the he was a sub in there, and a sub in the 2019 Asian Cup until Game 3, when he gained a starting position, and he was a starter in World Cup 2022. And I'll just preview the little summary here by saying that he played as a left back, whereas Haji Safi played as a left midfielder. So we saw them both on the field. Over the past 2 years, Milad Mohammadi has started 8 of their 21 games, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 5, and not selected for 7 others. So almost a likely candidate now that I'm going through it. Here, but we'll leave him at the possible level. And finally, we have Abu Fazl Jalali, and he returned from a 15-month absence in June of 2022 and started, well, I'll just go because he's possible but unlikely. I'll say that he has not been selected for the past 9 matches. So he came into the squad from an absence shortly before the World Cup and was surprisingly selected for the World Cup, which is why I'm putting his name on the list here, because he did appear in the 2022 World Cup and actually came in as a sub in Game 3. But he hasn't been called up since the World Cup. So I'd say as a 25-year-old, he's still kind of a candidate, but not being selected since the World Cup doesn't make his chances look good. So let's summarize the left back position. So usually it's one or the other, Ehsan Haji Safi or Milad Mohammadi. But when Haji Safi is not playing the position, that's when Mohammadi gets his time on the field. Haji Safi often playing in a different position. We have actually seen different players come in as a left back, so it's a bit confusing. But anyway, in the World Cup, it was Mohammadi at the left back position and Haji Safi further upfield as a left midfielder or even as a left winger. Okay, that is the left back position. And let's move on to the right backs. And we begin with candidate Ramin Rezayan. I always have trouble with his names. I think it should be illegal to have 5 vowels in a row in your name. Anyway, Ramin Rezayan. We have a likely candidate in Sadegh Morahami, and then a possible candidate in Salah Hardani, and then one player who seems to be off the squad, who we will leave off the list here. So let's go back to Ramin Rezayan. And he's been with the team since 2015 and has 55 caps and 4 goals. He has played in Qatar and in Belgium, but mostly in Iran. He's with Sepahan right now. And he was first selected for the 2015 Asian Cup, but he didn't see any action, just on the bench there. But in the 2018 World Cup, he was a starter, as he was in the 2019 Asian Cup. In the 2022 World Cup, he was on the bench for game 1, but when the manager made big changes after game 1, he gained a starting position as the right back. And in fact, he was absent for 3 years from the team. He returned just before the World Cup in November 2022. So what I suspect happened there is that maybe he was a favorite of Carlos Queiroz in Queiroz's first stint with the national team, and he liked him and brought him back in for the World Cup. And since he has been a regular starter, even under the new manager, so started 9 of their 12 games there and subbed in for 2 of them and missed just 1 game due to injury. So he looks like a definite candidate now, and actually he moved over to the left side and played as a left back 1 time, and also played as a left midfielder at least 1 time. But he doesn't move around as much as Haji Safi does. Okay, the likely candidate, Sadegh Morahami, has been with the team since 2018 and has 27 caps and 1 goal. And he plays for Dinamo Zagreb in Croatia. And over the past 2 years, he started 11 of their 21 games and subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 5. He was injured for the last 2, but that doesn't seem to be a serious injury, and not selected for 2 matches. So Sadegh Morahami getting some starts in the right back position there. And the possible candidate, Saleh Hardani, has been with the team since 2021 and has 3 caps, and he was off the team actually for 12 months. He didn't make the World Cup squad, and off the team for 12 months, but came back in September of this year and didn't start any, but was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2 of the last 3 matches. So that's why we have brought him back as a possible candidate. Definitely kind of on the outside looking in, but his recent participation putting him in the picture once again. Okay, so the situation in kind of a narrative on the right back position is actually Morahami consistently held the position prior to the World Cup, and he started there in the first game of the World Cup. But as we saw, Rezaian was brought back in by Carlos Queiroz, and after that poor loss to England, Rezaian gained the starting position for games 2 and 3. And since then, it's been Rezaian about 75% of the time and Morahami about 25% of the time. As on the left-back position, we sometimes see a player out of position coming into the spot. So I think Soja Khalilzadeh, the central defender, Soja Khalilzadeh, has played in the position, I think more than once, I think a couple of times. All right, that brings us to the end of the defense, and we move on to midfielders. We begin with defensive midfielders, and a lot of times there's not a difference between the defensive and central midfield. Sometimes in the 4-1-4-1 formation there is, but it doesn't make a big difference. Nevertheless, there are a lot of candidates. They usually bring about 5 or 6 to this position too. So we will go according to their coded position. So Saeed Ezzatullahi is a definite candidate. These are the ones coded as defensive midfielders. Rouzbeh Cheshmi, we sometimes see him as a central defender, but most of the time he is a defensive midfielder. So Rouzbeh Cheshmi, a definite candidate. And then we jump down to possible candidates: Ali Karimi, Milad Sarlak, and Ali Reza Alizadeh, I should say. Okay, let's take a look at these candidates. And Saeed Ezzatollah has been with the team since 2015 and has 57 caps and 1 goal. And he plays for a smaller club in Denmark, Vejle in Denmark. And he's also played for Rostov in Russia and Reading in England. So, and teams, several teams in Russia. And was with Atletico Madrid Youth Club in Spain. So he's been all over the place. And he got his first tournament in the World Cup in 2018. He was actually under a suspension for game 1, but gained a starting position for the following games. Not selected due to injury for the 2019 Asian Cup. And just as in the World Cup in 2018, he did not start game 1. He was subbed in at halftime and then gained a starting position for the games 2 and 3. So over the past 2 years, Ezzatullahi has started 15 of their 21 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. Subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2. So just 3 matches that he wasn't selected for. So we consider Saeed Ezzatullahi a definite candidate and a staple starter in the midfield. Next, we have Rouzbeh Cheshmi. So he's been with the team since 2017, but only 29 caps and 2 goals. He has been on the tournament squads. He was a starter in the World Cup 2018, but actually suffered a muscle injury in training, so was out for after game 1. Asian Cup, and then in the World Cup in 2022, he was a starter, but subbed out of halftime in game 1 and lost his starting position, probably to Ezzatullahi there. In terms of the last 2 years, he actually returned after an almost 2.5-year absence in November 2022. So another of those players brought back in just before the Cup by manager Queiroz. And over the past 2 years, he started, or since that time, he started 7 of their remaining 14 games and was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 3. So because he's been consistently called up since just before the World Cup, we have him as a definite candidate. However, he's not the starter. He's not necessarily a starter. Okay, 3 possible candidates. The first is Ali Karimi, and he has been with the team since 2016 and has 18 caps. Actually, he's not to be confused with the great player of the same name, Ali Karimi, who was born in 1978. So he's another Ali Karimi. He plays for Kayserispor in Turkey, and has been around actually, as I say, since 2016, but didn't make a squad until the 2022 World Cup, where he was a starter in that, but also lost his starting position after that poor game one against England. So yes, he returned in November of 2002, and since that time has only started 2 games. One of them was that World Cup game. He was on the bench for 1 and subbed in for 3, but not selected for 7 other matches. 2 of those due to injury, and 2 of them the last 2 matches. So Ali Karimi, just a possible candidate, once again returning just before the World Cup, but he has been more out than in since that time. Milad Sarlak got his first cap in 2021 and has 13 caps since that time. A bit of a surprise that he wasn't selected for the World Cup in 2022, but because he had played quite a bit before that time. However, over the past 2 years, he has started just 2 of their 21 games, subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 4, and not selected for 10 other matches, including the last 2 where he was injured, a hamstring injury. So that could possibly be an injury lasting into the Cup. We'll have to update that when we do the second part of this podcast. Milan Sarlak seems to, he's coded as a defensive midfielder, but he seems to kind of play all over the field when he gets a start. If he is selected, though, it would be definitely as a substitute, but we'll have to update his injury status. Ali Reza Alizadeh is the last possible candidate, and he's brand new to the team since 2023 with just 1 cap, and that cap was in June of 2023, where he was subbed in for a game. Otherwise, he's been on the bench for 3 matches, but not selected for the last 2 matches. So all 3 of these players, I think, missed the last 2 matches. Okay, so let's do, before we do a summary on the position, we will look at the central midfielders. And we have a likely candidate in Nouralahi. Ahmad Nouralahi has been with Iran since 2018 with 30 caps and 3 goals. He plays in the UAE and has been part of the tournament squad since the 2019 Asian Cup, where he was a substitute, and the 2022 World Cup, where he started all 3 games. So over the past 2 years, Nouralahi has started 9 of their 21 games, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 4, and basically not selected for 6 or 7 matches, one of them due to illness. So on the whole, Nouralahi is increasingly a bench player. There were 4 games recently in June, I think, that he was not selected for, but he did come back for the last 4 games, but was on the bench for 2 of them. And we've also seen him play as a central defender. So Nouralahi, a likely candidate. Next, I forgot to introduce the candidate, so I'll just do that now. We have a Mohammed Javed Hossein Nejad as a possible candidate, and we have 3 players who are possible but unlikely. I won't put them on the list because I don't think they'll make it. We have Reza Asadi, who came in for 5 of the last 9 games, but then wasn't selected for the last 4 of those. So I think I will put his name on the list because that's fairly recent. Mohamed Karimi exact same situation, actually. I was selected for 5 of the last 9, but not the last 4 of those. And then Saeed Mary, who was tried out in the CAFA Cup there in June, but doesn't seem to have secured any kind of a place on the squad, not called up since the CAFA Cup. So we won't put him on the list. Okay, well, we did cover Ahmed Noura Alahi, so we'll just go over Mohammed Javed Hossein Nejad. He has been with the team. Well, he got his first appearance on the bench in October, so just a short while ago. And he didn't start either of their 2 games in October, but he was subbed in for one and on the bench for one other. So a brand new 20-year-old. So they are starting to bring in a little youth, judging by that. And Mohammed Javed Hossein Nejad, a possible candidate. So now we'll summarize the position. We have a few defensive and a few central midfielders, and this is the kind of the narrative. So usually it's 2 players, but sometimes 3. We think they'll bring around 5 to the cup. And those 2 players are Eza Talahi and Nour Alahi, seeming kind of the standard pairing. But Nour Alahi is quite often replaced by various players. And that could be any one of a number of players. We've seen Haji Safi and even the right back move into the midfield position there. And sometimes the attacking midfielder, Saman Godos, comes back and plays as a central midfielder. So Eza Talahi more regular than Nour Alahi. Right. Let's talk a little bit about the left midfield and right midfield position, even though we have no candidates in either one. But unlike a lot of teams who don't use formations with this position, Iran sometimes does. If you envision the 4-3-3 formation, which they use, regularly enough. And they've also used a 4-3-1-2 formation in the CAFA Cup. You'll see that there's a left and a right midfielder there. But as I said, for the central midfield, it's sometimes it's players coded in other positions that play it. So we saw Haji Safi fairly regularly when they use that formation. Even Pour Alaganji played as a left midfielder once. And Reza on the right back coming in there once as well. So left and right midfielders. Rather than that, we're going to kind of talk about the midfield players in the upper quadrant, so the upper left quadrant, and that will be left wingers, left attacking midfielders, and even left forwards. So think of the upper left quadrant of the field as the area that we're doing now. But we'll go through the players as they are coded. So Mehdi Taremi plays all over the place up top, but he actually is coded as a left winger. So we have him as a definite candidate for a left winger. We have Mehdi Torabi as a definite candidate also. And we have Mohamed Mohebi as a likely candidate. And then we have just one player possible but unlikely, and I'll deal with him now because we're not going to put him on the list. And that is Mehdi Gaedi. And he just popped his head in June. He was actually on the squad for a bit in 2020, but was off the squad, and then kind of popped his head back in June 2023, appeared on the squad, but then wasn't selected for the last 4. So Mehdi Gaedi, possible but unlikely. We'll put his name on the list if he appears on the squad, the final squad. Let's go back to the top and take a look at Mehdi Taremi. So probably their biggest player. He plays for Porto in Portugal since 2020, and he's been with Iran since 2015 and has 73 caps and an impressive 40 goals, so scoring more than once every 2 games there. and he is 29 years old, so still has a few years left in him. His first tournament was the World Cup in 2018, where he was a sub, but then gained a starting position. And in the 2019 Asian Cup and 2022 World Cup, he has been a starter. Over the past 2 years, he started 17 of their 21 games. He was subbed in for one and out with coronavirus for one of those, and not selected for two others. So Mehdi Taremi, a definite candidate. And undoubtedly a starter, I might add. Unlike Mehdi Taremi, who is a definite candidate, but probably not a starter. Mehdi Taremi has been with the team since 2015, and he has 43 caps and 7 goals. And he also had his first tournament in the 2018 World Cup, but he didn't see any action in that tournament. In the 2019 Asian Cup, he started and finished game one, but then lost his starting position, so was just a substitute after that, and was a substitute in the 2022 World Cup. So he's always called up. He's just not often a starter. He started only 4 of their 21 games over the past 2 years, but he was subbed in for 6 and on the bench for 7. So only 4 matches that he wasn't selected for, and 2 of those were due to injury. So Mehdi Taremi, a definite candidate to be on the squad, but probably not a starter. Mohamed Mohebi is the likely candidate, and he has been with Iran since 2019 with 12 caps and 4 goals. And he plays for Rostov in Russia since 2023, so since recently, and Santa Clara in Portugal from 2021 to 2023. And we said he's been with the team since 2019, but actually he was absent for more than 3 years, but returned in March 2023 to start 7 of the remaining 9 games. So he's really coming in and asserting his spot. He was subbed in for the 2 other matches. So almost seems a definite candidate, but because we don't really know why he was off the team for 3 years before that, we put him as a likely candidate. But certainly making a strong bid is Mohamed Mohebi. So let's do a summary of the left wing section, and we'll say once again, this position we're thinking of the upper left quadrant of the field, and it's pretty fluid up front for Iran. We do often see other players in this position, so the ubiquitous Haji Safi sometimes shows up here too, twice in the World Cup actually. And we also in early in 2022, I think Jahan Baksh was over in this position on the left side as well. So it could be any one of these players, or even a player playing out of position. And I should add too, these players coded as left wingers, Mehdi Taremi, Mehdi Taremi, and Mohamed Mohebi often play in other positions themselves. So a lot of movement around the front there. Nevertheless, we'll stick with talking about the players in their designated position and move over to the right side. Once again, we're talking about the right upper quadrant of the field, but we're beginning with players coded as right wingers, and we have a definite candidate in Ali Reza Jahanbakhsh, and a also definite candidate in Ali Golizadeh there, and then one possible candidate in Mehrdad Mohammadi. I'm sorry. So let's take a look at these players. Ali Reza Jahanbakhsh has been with the team since 2013 and has 74 caps and 15 goals. And he'll be familiar to followers of the EPL, the English Premier League, because he was with Brighton for 3 years from 2018 to 2022. He's since returned to the Netherlands, where he was before that, and is playing for Feyenoord in the Netherlands right now. He's been part of the tournament squad since the 2014 World Cup, and sometimes as a starter and sometimes as a substitute. I won't go into more detail than that, but fairly active. Maybe I'll just say that in the 2022 World Cup, he started game one, but then he was subbed out at halftime and lost his starting position, just coming in as a sub in game two. Since then, or not since then, including that time over the past 2 years, he started 14 of their 21 games, and he was subbed in for two, and out for various reasons for 5 others, but actually only 2 of those was due to non-selection. So Ali Reza Jahanbakhsh, a definite candidate, as is our second candidate here, Ali Golizadeh. Ali Golizadeh has made a move recently, actually, to Lech Poznan in Poland. He was with in Belgium for 5 years before that, but now he's moved to Poland and is loaned out to a Turkish team, Kasim Pasa. So kind of doing some traveling is Ali Golizadeh. He's been with the team since 2018 and has 30 caps and 6 goals. But his first tournament was the World Cup in 2022. It was a bit of a surprise that he wasn't selected for the Asian Cup in 2019. He made the preliminary squad but didn't make the final cut. But in 2022 World Cup, he was subbed into game one at halftime and then gained a starting position, so probably taking over Jahanbakhsh's position there. Over the past 2 years, he has started 9 of their 21 games, and he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. But he was injured for the last 8 matches since March 2023. And there's no known return date given there. So I'm going to wait till the part 2 of the podcast to update that. But it is a bit of a concern because it looks like a long-term injury. But he's had it for a long time, so maybe getting close to recovery. Ali Golizadeh, so a definite candidate, but with an injury asterisk, I suppose. Finally, we have Mehrdad Mohammadi, and he has been with the team since 2019 with 4 caps and 2 goals, so not so many there. And the reason for that is that he was absent for 4 years. After his appearance in 2019. He returned in October 2023, so just recently, and didn't start either of the October games, but was subbed in for both of those. So making a late return is Mehrdad Mohammadi, and because of that recent return, we have to consider him a possible candidate. So let's summarize the right side in a narrative. So compared to the left side, which has had a variety of players, on this side it's more consistently Jahanbakhsh or Jahanbakhsh, I've heard him called, especially in recent times. So we saw that he lost the starting position in the World Cup, but nevertheless, he has been starting in that position most of the time since. But we did see Golizadeh get the starting position from him in the World Cup, and he does come into the position himself. However, Golizadeh may be injured, in which case Mehrdad Mohammadi would probably improve his chances to get in. But we'll update that when we get closer to the tournaments, and meanwhile move on to the forward lines. We include attacking midfielders in this line, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we summarize the position. But let's look at the candidates first, and we have likely candidate Saman Ghoddos, and we have a possible but unlikely candidate in Ami Hossein Zada. I'm just going to talk about him a bit to see if we should put him on the list. He got his first cap in March 2022 and was subbed in for the first three. He didn't start any games. He was on the bench for four and not selected for 11 other matches, including the last four. So it looks like he was around fairly recently, so we will put his name on the list. He was a substitute then in March and June, but not selected for the last four matches. So possible, but unlikely. Okay, and here we actually have the closest thing we have to a retired player that maybe I should have mentioned at the beginning, and that is Masoud Soje. So I'm going to actually put him on the retired list here because he was an important player for them from 2004 to 2019 with 87 caps and 8 goals. And however, his last tournament was the 2019 Asian Cup where he was the captain. But even though he was the captain, he only appeared briefly in game 4. However, his last game, he retired in club play. He retired from club play in July 2023. That's why he came to my attention here. But as far as the national team goes, he last appeared in November 2019. So basically, the Asian Cup was his last bash with the team. So Masoud Soje, anyway, gone for such a long time that they've certainly handled his absence. Okay, let us do a summary of the position then. And in fact, they don't often use a formation that calls for a central attacking midfielder or a secondary striker. We do have one secondary striker coming up. So when they do use an attacking midfielder, it actually really wasn't Saman Ghoddos. It was Mehdi Taremi. In two of the recent games where they used it. Their game against USA was one of the games where they had a central attacking midfielder. And then more recently, it was Mohebi. Mohebi playing in that position, Mohamed Mohebi. So not Saman Ghoddos. So the players here, Saman Ghoddos and the secondary striker, Amiri, that we'll look at soon, tend to play in different positions. So we saw Saman Ghoddos in a central midfield position and sometimes starting on the left side, maybe as a left attacking midfielder. And Amiri, the secondary striker, Vahid Amiri, starting as a forward sometimes. So kind of in and around there. And let's take a look at that secondary striker. Vahid Amiri. He's our only candidate in this position, and we consider him a likely candidate. Secondary striker Vahid Amiri. So he's been with the team since 2015 and has 72 caps, but only 2 goals actually. And he's 35 years old now. He's been part of the squad since the 2015 Asian Cup, and I won't go into much detail because he is a possible injury risk. He started 5 of their 21 games over the past 2 years. He was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 7. But he was out with 2 separate injuries for 4 matches, including the last 2. And he's not selected for one other. So I'm kind of in my head thinking that this is a longer term injury and that his likelihood is affected by that. But actually, I don't actually see in my notes that I've said that. So we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, Vahid Amiri, more of a substitute than a starter. We consider him likely to make the cup if he's fit. But a bit of a question mark about that. All right, let's move on to forwards. And we have the candidate, Sardar Azmoun, as a definite candidate, and Kareem Ansafarad as a possible candidate, and Shahriar Mogamlu kind of a new player there, coming into the squad as a possible candidate. And we do have a possible but unlikely candidate in Shahab Zahedi, but he's been off the team for a while. He's been off the team for the last 5 matches, but I think I'll just put him on the list because that's recent enough for him to be an outside consideration. Okay, let's go back to Sardar Azmoun. He has 73 caps for the national team since 2014 with an impressive 47 goals. So quite a scoring record there. And he's 28 years old, so still has maybe a couple of tournaments left in him. He's on the roster of Bayer Leverkusen in Germany, but actually was recently loaned to Roma in Italy in 2023. So he has an impressive resume of clubs, especially in Russia with Zenit St. Petersburg and Rubin Kazan. And he's been part of squads since, well, in the 2014 World Cup, he was selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the cut. But from 2015 Asian Cup onward, he has been selected for the final squad. In 2015 Asian Cup, he started as a sub, but gained a starting position and has been a starter ever since, except in the 2022 World Cup, where he came into the tournament struggling with a bit of injury. So Taremi played as the centre forward in the first game. He subbed in at 77 into game 1 and then gained a starting position after that. So over the past 2 years, he has started 10 of the 21 games, and he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 2. But he was out with 2 separate injuries for 2 games and not selected for 4. So, in fact, Sardar Azmoun is a player who struggles a bit with injury and so misses quite a few games for Iran. When he is fit, he's almost certainly a starter. But because he's out for quite a few games, and because they use 2 or 3 forwards, we often see other players coming into the position, primarily Mehdi Taremi. Let's look at the next candidate. It's the possible candidate Karim Antifarad, and he is like the eternal substitute. He doesn't start a lot of games for Iran, but he comes on later. He's been with the team since 2009 and has 97 caps and 28 goals. So it's worth bringing him on as a sub, I would say. And he plays for Ammonia in Greece. He moved from AEFK Athens and also played for Nottingham Forest in England too. So Karim Antifarad has been on squad since the 2011 Asian Cup. He was a sub in almost all of them. Only in the World Cup 2018 was he a starter. He started all 3 games there. But otherwise, he's kind of, or I wouldn't say famous, I would say I know him for being kind of a super sub who comes on and is quite threatening at the end of games. So that was his role in the 2022 World Cup also, although he didn't score any goals in that cup. So in the past 2 years, he started just 1 of their 21 games, and he was subbed in for 6 and on the bench for sorry, I didn't make my notes correctly. I think for 3 or 4, and not selected for 10 other matches. So that includes a spell where he was off the team from March to September 2023. So I wonder if he is kind of fading out. He is 33 years old and maybe kind of phasing out of the squad. But we consider him a possible candidate for this cup nonetheless. And the next candidate, or our last candidate really, is the possible candidate Shahriar Mokanlu. And he got his first cap in March 2023 and started 2 of their remaining games, subbed in for 2. However, he was out with illness for the last 2 and not selected for 3 others. So he joined recently, but we're not really sure how much action he is getting. And we'll have to maybe see in November if he's brought in. He does he played as a forward once, but he also played as a right attacking midfielder in his other start. So maybe joining the fray of players who kind of shift around quite a bit up at the top there. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the player-by-player kind of going through the candidates. And let's finish with some closing thoughts and then a preview of part 2. Well, nothing beyond what I said at the beginning, which is this is a fairly stable and mature squad. Much more stable than they were going into the World Cup. I think they'll be a big threat. There's a lot of maturity on this team. So even if they are kind of aging out, a lot of the players are between 29 and 33 years old. So really in a kind of a prime time. So this could be Iran's year because they're going to have to start looking toward rebuilding after this cup. But with the maturity they have and the stability they have, I think they will be a very good team at this cup. Let's take a look at what we're going to do in part 2. So when the squad lists come out, the final squad is announced. We're going to go over this list that we built during this podcast and then talk about whether those players made the squad or not. So the notable non-selections would be players at the likely or definite level that don't make the squad. And the surprise inclusions would be players who were at the possible but unlikely level or seemingly off the squad level, most of whom we didn't name here. We do have some players on our list, but we didn't include them here. So we'll add them back in or give more information on them. There are also always a couple of new players coming into the squad, so we will tell you who those are. And especially for Iran, we talked about several injuries. The only one we know that seems long-term is Puralaganji. Looks like he's definitely out for this tournament, but there are a couple of other players who we need to see what their situation is in closer to the cup in late December and early January. So we will give updates on those, and I hope you join us for that. We originally planned to tag on our past, present, and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We'd like to thank Naver Abachan and Pixabay for the wonderful music you hear in this mediacast. The title is called Arabic Trap.